You know, when we talk about the world's great religions, we usually jump right to the things that divide them. But what if one of the most incredible points of connection was hiding in plain sight? What if it's centered on a figure revered by billions across different faiths? Today, we're diving into a really profound and honestly surprising piece of common ground between Islam and Christianity, the shared belief in the second coming of Jesus. And to see just how big of a deal this is, just look at this data. A huge survey by the Pew Research Center found that a solid majority of Muslims, we're talking over 60% in the places they looked, believe in what's known in Islamic tradition as the Nuzul Isa. That means the descent or the second coming of Jesus. So right away, you can see this is not some fringe idea. It's a mainstream belief, and it creates this fascinating parallel in the end times views of two of the world's biggest religions.
All right, so let's break this down. Here's the plan for our explainer. First, we're going to really dig into this surprising common ground. Then, we'll introduce a modern way of thinking about this called BioIslam and what it sees as the ultimate goal. After that, we'll map out the whole spectrum of Islamic beliefs on this, because it's not all the same. And finally, we'll get into why Jesus, or Isa, holds such a high status in Islam in the first place.
So let's start there, with this surprising common ground. I mean, in a world that so often feels defined by interfaith conflict, the fact that there's a shared hope for Jesus' return is, well, it's a really unique bridge for conversation. It's this powerful reminder that even if paths seem to go in different directions, sometimes they can point toward a common horizon.
Okay, so how is this ancient belief being looked at today in our modern world? Well, that's where a framework called BioIslam comes in. And its perspective isn't just about nodding to an old prophecy. No, it's about actively looking to the future with this hope for some real clarity and renewal right here and now.
So, at the very core of the BioIslam framework, which, by the way, presents itself as a perspective built on solid, referenced research, is this really clear goal. The idea is that the return of Isa, or Jesus, has a very specific purpose: to clarify conundrums and cleanse corruption. This isn't just some vague spiritual reset. It's about tackling real, modern problems. The conundrums could be all the complex ethical questions we're facing now, from gene editing to AI, or even those centuries-old theological arguments that have created so much division. And from this BioIslam viewpoint, the second coming is really framed as a hopeful answer to our modern uncertainty and predicament. The corruption it talks about isn't just about money or politics. It's also about a spiritual and intellectual decay. Think about it. In an age of nonstop global crises and moral confusion, his return is seen as a kind of divine intervention that can finally cut through all the noise, restore some ethical balance, and give us that definitive guidance. It's a forward-looking hope for a final resolution.
Now, to really get the BioIslam perspective, we have to put it on the map of wider Islamic thought, because belief in a Nuzul Isa isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. There's a whole spectrum of ways people interpret it, and understanding that really shows you what makes the BioIslam view so different.
So you can really break this down into three main camps. First, you've got the traditionalists. For them, it's about a literal, physical return of Jesus. Their main focus is on protecting past orthodoxy and defending established doctrine. Then you have the modernist reformers. They saw this whole thing more as an allegory, a metaphor for society waking up and making progress through human effort. And then there's BioIslam, which kind of carves out its own lane. It agrees with the traditionalists that the return will be physical, but it completely changes the focus from the past to this radical hope for the future. And what's really fascinating here are the motivations behind each view. The source material, which is itself based on cited academic research, points out that the traditionalist focus on being distinct from Christianity often grew stronger during the post-colonial era as a way to reinforce a unique Islamic identity. On the flip side, you had modernist reformers, people like Muhammad Abduh and Rashid Rida, who were major thinkers trying to blend faith with modernity. They reinterpreted the whole idea as a symbol of our own human potential for progress. And then BioIslam comes along and charts this third path. It accepts the literal event, but frames it not as a defense of the past, but as the ultimate solution for the future.
So this all brings us to a really crucial question. Why Jesus? Why is he the one? Well, this intense focus isn't random or borrowed from anywhere. It's actually deeply woven into the very fabric of Islam's foundational texts. The reverence for Isa is absolutely central to the faith, and that's exactly why his return carries so much weight. And the evidence for this high status is just overwhelming in Islamic tradition. I mean, whenever his name is even mentioned, Muslims honor him with the phrase, "Peace be upon him," along with tons of other respectful titles. The Quran itself says very clearly that true believers should make no distinction between any of God's prophets. They're all part of one sacred chain. What's more, Islamic tradition places Jesus' rank above every single figure who came after Prophet Muhammad, and that includes the first four caliphs, who are held in the absolute highest regard. But maybe the most powerful piece of evidence is one you can actually see.
And this just brings it all home. In the Prophet's Mosque in the holy city of Medina, one of the most sacred places in the entire Islamic world, there is an empty tomb set aside for Jesus. It's right next to the tomb of Prophet Muhammad himself. This isn't just a theological idea. It's a physical, sacred space, literally held in reserve, waiting. It's a permanent, powerful symbol of his expected return.
So, we've looked at the doctrine, we've looked at the history, now let's switch gears to the mystical side of things. The famous 13th century poet Rumi gives us this incredibly profound metaphor. He completely shifts the focus. It's not about an external event in the future, it's about an internal, spiritual reality that can happen right now. For him, Jesus is that divine spark, that spiritual birth that can happen inside every one of us when we feel a deep pain and yearning.
And that leaves us with one final, provocative thought to chew on. Rumi's words really challenge us to take this ancient spiritual idea and connect it to our own lives in our own time. In a world filled with so much of its own pain, its own division, its own yearning, what could it mean for each of us and for our world to experience the birth of this Jesus of our soul? What kind of clarity and renewal could that possibly bring?